This is TWiT.
Over the last month, we've been talking about Google's advertising problem. You know the story. Big companies suddenly became aware that their advertisements were showing up on extremist videos by white supremacists, Holocaust deniers, rape apologists, and more. Companies like AT&T and Verizon cut ties with YouTube and then realized that relying on algorithms for advertising was not helping its bottom line. That's what YouTube realized. The company said they had an army of 10,000 raters who could fix the problem. Longtime tech journalist, editor, and author Annalee Newitz explored the world of Google raters for Ars Technica, and she's here to tell us about it. Welcome to the show, Annalee.
Thanks for having me.
So you write that these raters are largely unknown, even to some Google engineers. And now they want to change that. Can you tell us why?
So the raters I spoke with were at a company called LeapForce, which is one of the largest contractors with Google. And it's true that the Google engineers have no idea who these raters are, who are providing them with data. And the raters are working under conditions that they think are not optimal. Not only are they given tasks that are difficult to complete in the time allotted, but they also feel like they don't have a chance to give feedback to the engineers they're working with at Google about the kinds of questions they're being asked. They have a lot of ideas about how to improve the service, but they're kind of trapped in this situation where there's a firewall basically between their work and Google. They log into Google through a service called Rater Hub, and they're kind of kept inside there doing little tasks that are kind of like Mechanical Turk tasks. And they're not really able to give substantive feedback that they'd like to give.
What exactly is a rater? Like taking a little bit of a step back, a rater that's working behind the scenes for Google to improve the service, obviously, but what exactly are they looking at?
So they're doing a variety of tasks to help Google improve the performance of their algorithms. And the way they do that is they might be given anything from a task where they're giving feedback on whether voice recognition is working. They look at things like search results, whether a search result is the right one, or whether they're seeing the right kind of ad. That's context specific. They also do things like look at personalization services. So a lot of these raters are giving Google access to their private emails and photos, and then Google will show them personalization tasks, and the raters are asked to do things like say whether a photo has been properly identified or whether they're seeing the right kind of ads next to an email. And each of these tasks, this is where it gets really interesting. Each task is assigned a set amount of time that they can have to do it, or that they can be paid for doing it. So a task that involves looking at a couple of search results, might take seconds. But a task where they're doing something much more complicated, like listening to an audio file to see if the transcription is correct, takes a little bit longer. And LeapForce and Google will say, okay, this takes 6 minutes. The problem that the raters have is they say that Rater Hub often crashes, often takes longer to load a task than the task is allotted. And so they're losing a lot of time every day, and they feel like they're putting a lot more time into these tasks than they're actually getting paid for.
So you mentioned Mechanical Turk, which is, of course, run by Amazon, and they've come under fire for, paying people 30 cents for, a half an hour's of work or something like that. Like there's no minimum wage requirements. But I haven't heard much about the people behind the scenes at Google that are doing this work. So has anyone really talked about them, or are you one of the first people to bring this issue to light?
I'm certainly not the only one. There was actually a great article in Wired about one of the other companies that contracts with Google. They're called Zero Chaos. There's another company called Lionbridge that is also doing this kind of work. But, this is something that's only just now coming out. I think raters are coming forward because they feel like their working conditions are getting worse. What happened at LeapForce was about 20% of their raters in the U.S. were full-time contractors, and LeapForce abruptly decided to reduce their hours to 26 hours per week. So basically, these people were getting almost a 50% pay cut overnight. And that was why some of them came forward, because they really felt like that was the last straw. And because they are working full time on Google projects, they really feel like Google should take some responsibility and that Google is getting a lot out of their work, but is working with these kind of shell companies almost to kind of wash their hands of how the workers are being treated.
And are they subject to minimum wage rules?
I am not sure how that would work. They're actually currently at LeapForce being paid comfortably above the minimum wage at $13.50 an hour. But now that their hours are being reduced, they're actually also finding that their pay is reduced. So I think now a typical rater is paid between $12.50 and $13 an hour at the company that LeapForce is becoming, now that they're changing the hours and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem that companies have dealt with for a long time. I know I was a contractor for Microsoft for years, and I wasn't really working as a contractor for Microsoft. I worked for another agency through that. And, the companies sort of pay a lot to get around those rules, so they're not giving everyone stock options or, an office or that sort of thing. So UCLA Information Studies professor Sarah Roberts, you quoted her in your piece. She says that the raters are feeling isolated. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's right. And Sarah Roberts has done work interviewing raters both in the United States and in the Philippines for the past 5 years. And her work is excellent. And what she says is that all of these workers that she's interviewed, and some of them work for Facebook, some work for Google, they're all working at these third-party staffing agencies that provide raters sort of contracted to Google and Facebook and other companies. And the workers feel like they work for Google, but Google won't admit it because, especially in the case of LeapForce, the workers that I talked to, and 10 anonymous raters came to me and discussed this with me on the phone and in chat, and they said that every day when they went to work, they would log into RaterHub.com, which is owned and operated by Google. They felt like they were almost on the virtual premises of Google, and yet nominally, they're employed by LeapForce. And so there's this layer of kind of, I almost want to say like a layer of irresponsibility there where Google can kind of say, well, these aren't really our employees. Whereas the employees are like, but we spend all day at Google. All we do is respond to Google projects. The only algorithms that we're providing data about are Google algorithms. And so why aren't we considered Google employees? And there's some lawyers who feel like, maybe they could be viewed as Google employees. Increasingly now, labor law is recognizing a concept called joint employment, where two companies can be held equally liable for an employee. And it's in cases where basically both companies equally control the employee hours and control their working conditions. And that could be the case here with LeapForce. Obviously we don't know, that's just speculation, but that could be a possibility.
Is there any indication as far as who is calling for the reduction, or who, like, was it Google that just said we don't need as many hours, or was it their actual company that said we decided to pare things back? And in either case, how does that affect Google's product if suddenly you're, all of those people that were working on the quality of product are suddenly cut in half, their time's cut in half?
So I spoke with LeapForce CEO Darren Jackson, and he said that what happened was Google wanted to change the terms of the contract that the company had with them, and only wanted to be working with companies that had employees in their workforce. In other words, not contractors anymore. And the thing is that you can see that this is actually Google, in some sense, trying to be good guys, because generally employees are protected by more labor laws, and usually they're eligible for benefits if they're working more than 30 hours a week. And so what LeapForce did, because they didn't want to pay for health benefits, was that they decided, okay, we'll make everyone employees. They created a new company called Rater Labs. And that company is going to hire U.S. raters from LeapForce as part-time employees. So they've basically eliminated all full-time contractor jobs. They've created these part-time employee jobs, and that way they can continue to honor the terms of the contract they have with Google. So it's a lot of complicated legal maneuvering. And I think what it'll result in for Google is probably they won't get the kind of quality work that they're hoping for, because these are employees who feel like they're not being treated well. Many of them are terrified that they'll be laid off at any minute. A lot of them have been working full time and have now been reduced to part time, which means they're going to have to do other jobs in order to maintain their lives, in order to pay their rent and help their kids go to school. And so I think, again, to me as an outsider here, it looks like what Google might think about doing is maybe hiring raters internally. And it's possible that Google has excellent reasons not to do that, but it's unclear what those might be. And we know that historically Google did hire raters internally. So there's kind of a question there about what Google's motivations might be, and the company isn't saying right now.
It seems really ironic that they're doing this at a time when really they're sort of coming out and saying the algorithm can't do it on its own. That when it does, that's when they have these big mix-ups, that there's just so much content coming into Google and YouTube that they really need people behind that. People, not just anybody, but someone that can really think about what's a good response to show as a search query, that sort of thing. But at the same time, you say they're cutting these people's pay.
Yeah, it does seem very ironic. I think that one of the things that in writing about this story that I really came to appreciate is how much humans are needed for a lot of these algorithms to work well. And this isn't to say that the algorithms aren't great. It just means that, we're not living in a world where algorithms have replaced human labor. Algorithms have kind of created a new category of human job, which is the rater, who is a person who tests the algorithm and gives feedback on how accurate it is. And the reason why we have to have those raters is because Google is constantly tweaking its algorithms to make them better, to reflect changes in conditions, to reflect new information, new products. And so in one way, you would think, well, this is good news. Now humans are not going to be replaced by bots and algorithms. But on the other hand, it doesn't seem like the tech companies like Google and Facebook, which also employs a lot of raters, it doesn't seem like they've really caught up with that reality yet, and that they're still kind of wanting to pretend or believe that they don't need humans, and they just, even though they'll say, we're so proud of our 10,000 raters who are helping us out, at the same time, they sure don't act like they're proud of it if you look at the employment practices here.
Mm-hmm. And unlike a company like Uber, it's sad, but you can see that they are headed for an autonomous car ride-hailing system, and so they won't need that. But I feel like we're a long way from not needing humans to decide which ads go on YouTube videos. But it doesn't make a lot of fiscal sense. I mean, it's so there's, I guess, 300 hours of YouTube videos, I think, that are uploaded every minute. So it's fiscally to have someone looking at all those. I mean, I guess, yeah, it's difficult. But you said that there's an update to the story. Someone that you talked to has gotten laid off. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so one of the raters that I talked to, as I mentioned, 10 different raters at LeapForce, and they spoke to me anonymously. I didn't know their names. They talked to me under pseudonyms. And one of them, the management at LeapForce figured out who he was, and he was fired. They're claiming that he breached contract, but he, is now fired and hasn't been able to get them to explain what part of the contract he breached. It is true that all LeapForce employees sign a very broad NDA along with all the other contractual obligations. So that's definitely in the mix. And so he's basically, for speaking out about his working conditions, he's been fired. And, there's a lot of questions about whether that's legal. Workers are permitted in the United States still to speak about their working conditions. And a lot of what he spoke to me about was actually public information that you can get by reading Google's guidelines for raters. So there wasn't a lot that they could claim was a trade secret. So he's basically had a classic problem that people have in workplaces when they do speak out about work abuses and when they talk about how their salaries are being cut. Oftentimes, employers do take retribution and in this way. So it's super unfortunate. I have a piece up at Ars Technica today talking about the details of that and how we know that he likely was fired for speaking to Ars Technica because one of his fellow employees turned him in to the management and was boasting about it to other friends.